The whole discovery of Tutankhamun needed both ingredients to make it work. It wasn't only Howard Carter, so it's certainly not only Carnarvon, but it needed the two of them. Without the two of them, that discovery would never have been made. He really met Carter some years after he began his first excavations, because he first got permits really around 1906 or so. And of course, they're very different characters from entirely different types of background. Great-grandfather from the very old, I suppose, aristocratic family of the Herberts of Highclere, the lone maverick adventurer, and Howard Carter, another loner. I mean, a man who became inspector of antiquities in first Upper and then Lower Egypt, but he got into a major dispute at Saqqara with a lot of French tourists about when or not they should or shouldn't be inside a tomb. It became a diplomatic incident. And Carter eventually resigned his position, and he was rather unemployed, really. For a man who had already developed a lot of skill as a recorder, archaeologist, and expert on antiquities, Carter was making his living drawing paintings for tourists on the side of the Nile. Great-grandfather was introduced to Carter, perhaps as a way of bringing more experience and expertise on the ground, in line with a very keen and enthusiastic and financially independent excavator in terms of my great-grandfather. And the two of them together obviously became a much more powerful force. So it's from really 1909 onwards that Carter and Carnarvon were working together.
Because of his wealth, he had 5 teams on the go at the same time in about 1910, with perhaps 170 to 275 men and boys in each team. They called Carnarvon Lordy. He paid them well. He had the money. He
was well known at all levels of society. He was happy to be a diplomat and intermediary negotiating with the most senior people.
If they hadn't found Tutankhamun, the discoveries of 5 thieves were pretty considerable. It was an amazing achievement, and a beautifully recorded achievement, beautifully photographed, written up. It was a very good piece of work. The book 5 Thieves is outstanding. There's a tent which he shipped over from England with loads of food from Fortnum's. You know, a tent for himself, a tent for his wife, a tent for Howard Carter, a tent for his doctor, a tent for a dining room, a tent for a... It was extraordinary.
I was actually in Luxor last week. You can cross the ferry across the Nile on a ferry the same way as they did then. But nowadays, the other side, you get in an air-conditioned car and drive up to the valley. Those days, you were on a mule or a pony for a long time, just getting up to Carter's house, which has recently been restored. My grandfather financed the building of Carter's house near the entrance to the valley. And the fact, interestingly, the foundations of this rather wonderful, in a way, part mud brick building came from one of great-grandfather's houses over here. There was a house.
They shipped the house?
The bricks from Bretbury, which was up in the Midlands, which was a Midlands type of bricks, and they were part of the Bretbury setup. They were shipped out to Egypt to be the foundations. You did that kind of thing in those days. My great-grandfather had the concession in the valley, and he had agreed that for one more year of excavation in 1922, and specifically he knew they had to cover that final area near Ramesses VI's tomb, because it was the one unexplored area, mainly because they'd kept out the way of it for the previous 2 years so as not to disturb tourists coming into the valley, which is such a sort of a contemporary issue. There were clues about Tutankhamun. Carter knew there was a missing pharaoh from the descriptions of the lineage of pharaohs that Manetho had worked out. His Tutankhamun was mentioned, but no information. It must have been a very brief reign. The predecessor to their work in the valley, Theodore Davis, the American, he'd found a shallow pit with garlands, flowers, and there was a little things with a cartouche of Tutankhamun's throne name. He sent things back to America, but rather thought Tutankhamun was so unimportant that he'd been buried in a shallow grave with a few objects. In fact, what that little pit was the priests who just sealed the tomb's final ceremonial little moment. I think Herbert Winlock, who was at the Met at the time, he'd pointed out to Carter that there may be something exciting here, because this little vase had Tutankhamun's throne name on it in the valley. Therefore, it gave the idea that if that was the case, then Tutankhamun should be buried somewhere in the valley. But obviously, they're still at that stage. They had no idea where, and it was only about, well, barely 50, 60 meters from Tutankhamun's actual tomb. I think in a way, if people say mountaineers climb mountains because they're there, there was a quest to find a tomb because it was there somewhere in this amazing valley. And of course, the 18th dynasty pharaohs were buried in the valley, and there was a missing one. I mean, the valley may yet yield more secrets.